Hey, what's up, people? We ended up taking a short little break over the past 2 weeks. I'm trying to be a better podcaster and and a better professional for you all by having episodes already in the queue. But what I'm learning, and if you haven't done this, and if you're an aspiring podcaster or an aspiring science and wellness communicator, I will urge you to go over to Threads and follow the podcast Threads community, because what I think is really nice about this community is that it's making me feel more human. I had posed this question inside of one of our Threads chats, and I was like, hey, how many podcasters out there are actually planning for multiple episodes ahead and have them actually recorded? And a stunning amount of people had said that they either do it day of, like what I'm doing today, or they have them in the queue beyond 20 episodes. Those are the types of people that I aspire to. But given the circumstances of life be lifing, that's exactly what happened over this past 2 weeks. And so I wanted to start the pod off with first an apology, but then also a celebration. The last 2 weeks for me, traveling, doing things that I really love, I had the opportunity to sit in front of some really, really beautiful minds in the media and creator space, on top of getting to drive rally cars and jumping raptors and whatnot. And so the past 2 weeks have been fun nonetheless. But all that being said, after this short break, what happened over the time that I was gone really shook me in a way where it caused me to be a bit more curious. So in today's episode, we're actually diving into a stirring piece by Andrea Love, who was a writer for The Slate. She tackled the work and the influence of Andrew Huberman and the Huberman podcast. And if you have no idea who he has a massive following. His podcasts are usually generally around 2 hours. And as he shines his scientific credentials, he gives you no cost protocols into how you can hack your health. Which, to any person who is listening, if you can empower someone to do something at no cost, who is not going to listen? And so right away, because I knew how massive of a following this individual had, I was already locked in. So it was published on the 27th of March. And what I think is really interesting about what Andrea Love did in this, I guess, editorial about his downfall and his possible cancellation was pulling back the curtain of not only his widely popular podcast, but his scientific credentials against the practices and claims that he usually throws out. And after reading the article itself, I already knew, just from the type of people that constantly either quote his work or take his work and go to social media with a lot of our wellness influencer engagement, I already kind of knew that a lot of what he preaches is very much pseudoscience, because it does paint a picture of a landscape riddled with pseudoscience and giving you these no cost protocols, which to me is incredibly engaging. And if you look at the type of individual that he is, so he has a PhD in neuroscience with an expertise in optic nerve signaling. And for him, as he's promising these zero cost protocols, you can imagine that it makes total sense why people really love him. And as someone who also has a lab at Stanford, you already know from a credentialing standpoint that this is probably someone that you should listen to. Really, if I'm being very transparent, and we'll get more transparent here as I go on, I utilize some of the same tactics. And that might be a little bit of my ego of saying like, hey, I'm a dietitian, I'm an expert in this field, this is why you should listen to me. So after this podcast, and I'm going to talk about my learnings from what we can learn from what's going on here, but I'm going to try to do better in the way that I communicate science and the way that I communicate habits and rituals that allow you to show up as that best version of yourself or allow you to perform at a higher level. So I'm already getting some learnings from it. And I feel like as science communicators that we are in the podcast scene, on social media, whether you're a dietitian, a fitness coach, or someone just in the scientific community, I think it does push us to be a bit more stringent on not only how we communicate information, but also how we relay it in a way that hits with you all in the realm of cultural and health literacy. And I think that's what today's bigger discussion is going to be about. So if you haven't been living under a rock, you've probably heard that Andrew Huberman has been accused of dating 6 girls at the same time. And while you might not care about that, it does actually illuminate some issues with the possibility of his Stanford lab not even really existing, and how he positions himself and provides jargon in a way where you feel like you should listen to him. Now, I'm never someone to bank on someone's fallout. I'm not sure I heavily agree with what is known as cancel culture, but the fallout of this does help us to understand the complexities of controversies like this that extend far beyond the individual, because it does impact the health and wellness community at large, and it does raise pertinent questions not only about the responsibility of influencers in health science, but also the potential erosion of public trust when giving wellness advice. And from a broader context, I think it does push us as science communicators to see how we can discern credible information in a sea of ongoing misleading claims. And as consumers and as people, as a podcast family, I think it is our responsibility to not only take a look at the type of person who is creating content from a science perspective, but also doing so in a way where the types of people that you are following are actually not only just credible people, but also people that pull on some of their own experiences and actually communicate that without utilizing their professional stature, on top of engaging into some storytelling into their life in a really cool and vulnerable way. And I think with today's podcast, I really wanted to discuss the implications of what we have here and what this means for us as we follow some of these people or enjoy some of these podcasts, or really just mainly enjoy this podcast in itself. And I wanted to do so in a way where we're creating some thought starters around how we not only, on my side as science communicators, not only how we create communication around it, but also as consumers, how we listen to it, because there is a thin line between influence and responsibility. So, as wellness influencers, how do we navigate responsibility that comes within our platforms, especially when presenting these types of health information? Because these personal findings of all or nothing thinking is oftentimes a big platform, or what you might see with a lot of the biohacking influencers or fitness influencers that you might see on social media. And while I'm not one to shit on social media as a whole, because I'm a part of that, and I have also been prone to being excited about some brand new research or being excited about something that I learned, and stepping on this podcast and pressing record and being excited about it. And then later on, understanding that, like, wow, I was totally wrong. And so if you kind of think back in past episodes, I called myself out in regards to some of the sleep apps or the sleep wearable technology, and finding that, wow, just like the other technology that we find with our Apple Watches or other types of wearable tech, the quality and the quantitative data really doesn't stack up. And oftentimes it's very inaccurate. And so I think as communicators, it is very responsible of us to admit when you're wrong, because science is just that. It's constantly disproving what we think that we know. And I think that's what's really exciting. And as you get into a topic of field, so let's just take as a dietitian, nutrition and wellness as a whole. We're constantly learning new things. And I think if we stay curious about not only just our learning style, but also how we want to portray the information, I think it really sets us up to set you up in a way where you feel like you can trust the type of person that you're learning from. Because what I think Andrew Huberman is very guilty of inside of this umbrella of pseudoscience is constantly giving you these zero cost protocols and stating things like evidence backed or science says. Because I think as a consumer, if you're listening to him, and even I've been guilty of this too. I've listened to his podcast and I'm like, wow, this sounds great. And because this person is in a position of authority, of scientific authority, I should probably listen to him. Because for us as listeners, we don't really know the differences of the science that a lot of science communicators are talking about. For instance, in a lot of his episodes, he does state that it is science backed, and is able to link different articles and things like that. But from a consumer perspective, my assumption is that you don't know the differences in regards to research pertaining to things that are done in vitro, which are more done in a lab outside of something that is living, or done in vivo, which is something that is living. So we got animal studies and we have human studies. And then we also have the types of studies that you want to take your health information or your health interventions from, where you take two groups of people and you give one group the intervention and the other group perhaps a placebo. And then we get peer reviews from that science. And that's the type of communication that we want, because the scientific community has tested it and has given some peer revision on their thought process behind it. And I think for me, this is something that's super evident and something that actually happened over this past year. So if you think back in June of 2023, there was this big article and big research article that a lot of the media picked up about the benefits of taurine and aging. And so as someone who is also an energy drink dietitian, if you will, I got tons and tons of people that sent this over to me that were like, Desi, oh my God, like our beverage is curing aging. Like, what do you think about this? And while I was really excited about just the thought of a nutrient in regards to taurine being a non-essential amino acid that our body already makes in readily available amounts, to me as an individual, that's exciting because it empowers me to say, okay, well, if this is done in a supplemental form, if this is done or from getting them from things like shellfish or poultry, like I have control over aging. Being 38, you might say like, Des, you're still young, like chill the F out, but I'm still thinking about my health. And so when I first saw this, I was like, oh my God, this seems really exciting. But as you look at the research, what they found with those types of studies is that the studies were actually done in vivo. So they were done with a living organism, but they were done in worms. And I don't know about you, but humans and worms metabolize, they do everything differently. And so while the research is really exciting, to be honest, miss me with that. Talk to me when you have a group of subjects that are waged against a group of another. You give the subjects this supplemental taurine, and if it actually reduces aging versus the placebo, then I might listen to you. And that's where I think that a lot of science communications, whether that be done in media or social media or beyond, that's where I really think we miss the boat of communicating something that might be exciting or something that you might think that will really hit with your podcast community, and communicating that, but also take into account, where is this research coming from? Now, I said this earlier, I'm not someone who preys on someone's downfall. Yes, I I will tell you right now that I would love the Huberman Labs podcast following, 100%. That would be dope as hell. And to be honest, that's exactly why I'm continuing in this journey, because I feel like we got something here as a pod community. But I think for us, we do need to take a look and understand that this types of criticism for an individual could help as a catalyst for growth. And maybe it might not be a catalyst for him. I have no idea. I've never met the individual. I hope he's well. You're dating 6 women. If that's what you guys are cool with, that is none of my business. What is my business, though, is the types of consumers that are not only consuming the message, but also doing so in a way where they are waging their health empowerment regarding science that is actually not scientific if you think about it. And I'll be honest with you, with a controversy like this, I'm someone who really wants to grow this pod community in a really special way. I'm gonna probably have to answer to things that I've said on this podcast that might not be true, or maybe things that I didn't dive into, that I kept very high level. As a communicator, this is my responsibility, not only to do my due diligence, but to do so in a way where if I am wrong, I do need to be that type of person, that type of podcaster and leader to come back and be like, yo, remember podcast X, number X, I was totally wrong. Let me go ahead and tell you a little bit more about what we're finding or what I just learned. And I think for us, this is our contribution to health literacy. This is our contribution to not only just being culturally competent, but also to be health competent as well. And now at this point, you might be thinking to yourself, like, okay, Des, I hear you. Like, thanks. You just burst my bubble. Now, who can I trust? And this is where I think we can start thinking critically, and we can ask ourselves, how can listeners and followers of wellness influencers or people that we really love in the podcast community develop critical thinking needed to sift through health information and some of the pseudoscience that's out there? And to answer you, I'm actually going to pull on a recent article that I did for Men's Health, and I'm going to keep it within the scope of habits and rituals pertaining to nutrition and wellness. And so I wrote an article a couple months back because Men's Health had said, like, hey, there's a lot of misinformation out there. How do we communicate to our readers and consumers like who to trust? And I developed 4 key points that I would love to share here that I think are still very true to this day. And I think the first thing that we need to look at is accreditation and expertise of the person who is creating communications around science and health. And again, in this same vein, we just talked about how Andrew Huberman is positioning himself as an expert and doing so in a way where he is still preaching pseudoscience and people are still trusting him. So I think, once again, we are to think critically, but if we keep it within the lens and the scope of nutrition and wellness, you might want to look for people who have that registered dietitian credential. And that's not to put out people who didn't have the privilege like I had for myself to attend a 4-year college and to also pay for a an unpaid internship for a year and then beyond that. Because there is the precision nutrition certification that Precision Nutrition does. It's called the PN1. I believe they have a PN2. There are some other nutrition accreditations out there that I think are incredibly solid. And let me be the first to tell you that I have met some really, really crappy dietitians and some phenomenal nutrition coaches that don't have an RD credential to their name. And it's been vice versa. So it's really not just about the accreditation, but that does create a foundation of the types of people that we want to receive communication from. Because beyond that, this is where we can look at the theme of evidence over anecdotes. Yes, I would love it if science communicators would pull from their own experiences, but they need to state that before they do it. Because true experts are going to rely on the research. They're going to rely on the research of clinical human studies in the same way that we're talking about here, where you take a subgroup where you give them the intervention and you take another subgroup and you give them the placebo and you see what happens. So we want to look at not just these singular studies that people cherry pick. And this is often what happens in social media, in the social media sphere of wellness influencers. They'll cherry pick a study and they'll go all in on it. And even more so, we have influencers out there who constantly cite their own experiences as proof that a diet or an intervention works. And while I think personal stories are incredibly important, I would challenge us to look at individualized insights from the standpoint of preaching this big theme of nuance, because nutrition and wellness is never a one size fits all. Even the best experts know this, because true wellness intervention and change needs to speak of the individuality and the diversity of their dietary needs and their wellness needs. Because when we pull on these individualized insights in a really responsible way, we also understand that a healthy diet and healthy interventions or healthy habits and rituals encompass a variety and balance and never preaching restriction or a one size fits all. And those same individuals are never going to preach some sort of one diet dogma like you might see with the carnivore diet or some of the most popular diets out there. But they're advocates for sustainable and personalized approaches that people can actually take and be consistent with. Because I think the consistency factor is what most people miss, and a really big reason why dietitians like myself have a platform, because we are teaching a sustainable practice of what we understand inside of human behavior. Because I think therein lies, we can actually hold space for the nuance of your access to food, your access to education, information, and then beyond. And I think the last point of what really promotes the real ones out there that are doing science communication in a really effective way is that there's a great deal of transparency rather, and humility. Because one red flag that you can be confident of in the media sphere, if you will, is that there's a guru that claims to have all the answers and speaks in definites. I oftentimes joke with a lot of my clients pertaining to this when they send me a social media post or send me an article about this new miracle thing to be doing. Because if you talk to a real one, if you talk to a professional that understands health literacy and cultural literacy, you're likely going to get the answer if you pose a question, well, it depends, or sometimes. And while that might be really frustrating, believe me, it's also frustrating too that I don't know everything, but I can also be humble enough to understand that sometimes nuance provides much more complexity than we actually give it space for. Because we are very much, if you think about it, in a social diet era. We're going to see that likes and shares are going to be our truth, if you will. And those same truths are oftentimes going to dictate diet trends and how the public receives information and what they do with that. But I think the truth of actual dietary wisdom or wellness wisdom is that the trend is never overnight. It's a consistent effort over time where we can start seeing progress over time. And my big push for you today is, instead of completely overhauling your diet or your wellness habits and rituals because someone has said that this one thing works, I want to challenge you to think critically about not only who is communicating the information, but also how this applies to you. Because if you think about it, your health and wellness deserves a level of scrutiny. It deserves a level of, am I listening? And what I'm listening to actually true? Not only just from a scientific perspective, but also, is it true for me? Now, please believe, I hate trolls. I can't stand someone who throws a comment out there and also pairs that with a private account. It's like one of my biggest pet peeves out there. But I want to honestly challenge you to be a troll for good, because I want you to be selective, not only just with your health information and the type of health creators that you follow, but I want to push you and empower you to do so in a way where you can take charge of some of the things that you have control over. And I started this podcast with saying that I never want to prey on someone's downfall, but I think with the recent implications of what's happening with Andrew Huberman, I think it does cause us to question not only just him, but also who else we're listening to and where they're coming from. Are they humble in their message? Do they speak in definites, or do they speak in, you know what? It depends. Do they speak under an umbrella of nuance? And as we come to a close in today's message, let's remember that the journey through health and wellness is fraught with challenges, controversies, and learning curves. And our story of Andrew Huberman serves as a poignant reminder of the delicate balance between influence and integrity, something that's not talked about all the time. So whether you're an influencer, a professional, or simply someone trying to navigate their own health journey, let's take this opportunity to reflect on our own values, our sources of information, and how we can contribute to a more informed, healthy, and skeptical world. Because in this case, being a skeptic is totally okay. All right, y'all. That's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed. I'm back. I'm sorry for the small break. Life was lifing. This is my humble position on what happened. But I'm excited for next week's episode, and I hope you are too. Mad love to you. Have a beautiful week. Let's get it.